Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I am Suzanne Kanawi, Marketing Manager at AUC Press and Hopo Fiction Imprint. Today, we're going to discuss The Jinn Daughter, a spellbinding debut novel by Rania Hanna, published by Hopo Fiction in April 2024. And today's talk is going to be around 1 hour, and we're going to have room for some Q&A at the end. So please, if you have any question, type them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And if you're joining on Facebook Live, you can also ask questions in the comments section, and we're going to ask them on your behalf. And so our novel today, The Jinn Daughter, as mentioned, this is a stunning debut novel by Rania Hanna. It's an impressive feat of storytelling that pulls together mythology, magic, and ancient legend in the gripping story of a mother's struggle to save her only daughter. It is the story of Nadine, who is a jinn tasked with one job, telling the stories of the dead. She rises every morning to gather pomegranate seeds, which are the souls of the dead, that have fallen during the night. And with her daughter Layala at her side, she eats the seeds and tells their stories, and only then the departed pass through the final gates of death. But when the seeds stop falling, Nadine knows something is terribly wrong, and all her worst fears are confirmed when she is visited by Kamuna, Death herself, and ruler of the underworld, who reveals her design for someone to replace her. Her daughter, Layala. The Jinn Daughter received numerous positive reviews from critics and readers alike. It was described by Elle magazine as a lush and mesmerizing story of motherhood and magic, and was reviewed by Washington Independent Review of Books as compelling, and its imagined world is vast and fascinating. If you haven't had a chance to read The Jinn Daughter, you can order it worldwide from major bookstores and online from book retailers, or you can use one of the purchasing links that I'm going to paste in the chat box shortly. We're so delighted today to have with us our author, Rania Hanna, who is a Syrian American writer and researcher. She is a neuroscience doctoral student at George Mason University, very impressive. And this is her debut novel, The Jinn Daughter. Also with us today is our moderator, Melanie Magidow, who is the founder of Marhaba Language Expertise, providing Arabic to English translation, specializing in academic and literary, English editing, and related consulting in Arabic language, literature, and culture. She holds a PhD in Middle Eastern languages and cultures from the University of Texas at Austin, and receives fellowships from the National Endowment for the Arts, the National Endowment for the Humanities, and the Fulbright Commission. Melanie has translated The Tale of Princess Fatima, a Warrior Woman by Penguin Group, published in 2021, and Mortal Designs by Reem Bassiouni, published by AUC Press in 2016. Today, we have the wonderful opportunity to discuss this remarkable book and explore themes, characters, and Rania's unique writing style. And I encourage everyone to share their thoughts, ask questions, engage in what promises to be a lively and insightful conversation. Please join me in welcoming Melanie and Rania. And now, over to you, Melanie.
Thank you so much for that introduction. And welcome to everyone. Congratulations to Rania on your first book.
Thank
my
you.
Copy. That was such a great introduction. I just wondered if you would like to introduce any more about the storyline or the main characters for our listeners.
Yeah, I mean, Susan did such a great job, I think, describing the premise. I will say, for me, writing the novel was really about telling the story about grief. It's definitely a grief-based tale about, each character is going through their own grief, whether it's the grief of a life that could have been, a life that was, a life lost. Ultimately, that's why I decided to write this novel. But Susan did such a great job, so I kind of got in the core of it.
Lovely. What is it like to see your first book in publication?
I'm still not sure. It kind of feels like it's very fresh, very new, obviously, because it is my debut, but I also feel like I've been working on this for so long that the fact that it's out, I just it's almost like, oh yeah, I've been working on this for so long, so it's not as new and fresh at the same time. But I will say I've definitely been feeling a lot of community, a lot of support that I wasn't really expecting. I've had friends who, I was friends with them in, elementary school, middle school, who are supporting me. I haven't seen them in 20 years, and people I've never met before who are very supportive, very excited for me. So there's been a lot of community there that I'm really appreciating. It's such a good feeling to know that people care about what you've written and what you have to say. And, I love being able to share that with them.
Thinking back, what was your first inspiration for this novel? Does anything come to mind as the first spark?
Yes. I read Tahra Mafi. She is a Persian American author. I read her novel Witchwood. It's a middle grade fantasy. And I just loved her style of writing. I loved the way she was kind of making death a character, in a sense, because there's this, and I read it so many years ago that I'm a little fuzzy on the details, but there's this storyline about this corpse washer, and this young woman is a corpse washer, and she has to prepare the dead for the next life. And I loved that idea. And so when I finally finished reading the book and set it down, the first line of Jinn Daughter kind of came to me. So I quickly wrote it down. I started typing, and then the story just kind of started flowing. And so really the inspiration was Witchwood, was Tahra Mafi, and her idea about death being something to take care of. You have a caretaker of death. And coupled with when I was younger, I got into fantasy through Garth Nix, reading Sabriel, his Old Kingdom series, and that's all about death. It's all about the realm of death as its own setting, its own character almost. And so all of that kind of converged and became the inspiration for Jinn Daughter.
I love how the realm of death needs tending by a caretaker in your book, like a garden. There's also a nurturing aspect to death and the care of the dead, like preparing the body, caring for the soul seeds. Is there anything else you want to say about that nurturing, caring, the caretaker? It seems like there's a connection to nature. Not everybody thinks of death as living, but when you need a caretaker, it seems like it's living. I don't know if you want to say anything about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of that is this idea about when we die, we return to the earth and we become the cycle, part of the cycle of every other living being. It's like that whole thing you learn in, elementary school when you're learning about dinosaurs. It's the water we drink now is the water the dinosaurs drank. So everything's connected through time, through nature, through death. And I think also for me in writing, because again, it was such a grief story, I wrote the novel thinking about death in terms of us kind of nurturing the memories we have of those who have departed that we've cared about in life. And so all of that kind of converged into this idea of taking care of death as a way of, and same with the soul seeds, it's all about the memories that the soul has. And that's kind of what I was going for, is that we nurture our memories of our departed, we take care of them, we share our memories with other people, and it's our way of keeping them alive once they're gone. But then once we're gone, the next generation kind of takes care of us in that way as well.
Is there anything that you would like to say about your family background in connection with this novel and the writing of it? I'm asking this partly because you mentioned this in some other interviews, and it's connected to another question I have.
Yeah. So I'm Syrian American. I grew up in a household that spoke Arabic. My dad never read me stories because he was always telling me stories. And so he's a phenomenal storyteller. He really brought to life the oral tradition of storytelling in the Arab world, especially, in a place like Syria where, you have, I think it's Al Fawar Cafe in Damascus, which still does oral storytelling. You have the old men of the village, of the city, coming to the coffee house and telling stories. And so my dad really fed me the steady diet of stories growing up. And so within Jinn Daughter, I have, of course, the frame narrative, but there are also those smaller stories kind of peppered in. And that came directly from my dad. You know, some of the stories, like the King of Gamblers, was a story my dad told me growing up. A lot of the other stories aren't necessarily ones that he told me, but they're kind of in the tradition of his style of storytelling. And I really wanted to honor him because he's the one who made me a writer. You know, if it weren't for him and his stories, I don't think I would have been as interested in my culture, in my language, and even in writing itself. And also just growing up, you know, reading 1001 Nights, and you know, it's all of these smaller stories that are all kind of connected, and I really wanted to kind of bring that to life in my own writing.
So the two of the main characters are Nadine, mother, and her daughter Layala. Did your own relationship with your mother, or an imaginary relationship with your daughter, or do you have any connection to these two characters? Because you've mentioned your father. I asked about your family background in general, or because the mother-daughter relationship has a role in this, but I'm wondering if you're thinking of it more as just parenting or connections between people more generally. Or
Yeah, I think when I started writing, I was getting older, and I was able to kind of take a step back from, you know, being a teenager, being in my early 20s, and kind of think about, you know, my relationship with my parents. So I'm an only child. I grew up very close to them. I shared everything with them. I spent a lot of time with my family. And of course, in the teenage years, tension, typical tension, I think, of a teenager and parents. But because I had that distance, I can start thinking about, you know, how a relationship between a child and a parent shifts, you know, and hopefully it evolves and matures into something that's, you know, safe and healthy and you know, rich. And I've had that, especially with my mother. I wrote the book at a time when my relationship was really growing with respect to her. I think we've gotten a lot closer over the years as I've gotten older. And so I really wanted to kind of build that in. And it wasn't necessarily like a conscious decision, I think. I think it just kind of came out based on what I'd been thinking about a lot lately at that time. But, you know, especially with Nadine having to go through this evolution of her character of being so protective of her only child, of her only daughter, and then kind of accepting the fact that her daughter wants to live a life that's different than what she expected for her. And I think it's, you know, I'm not a parent, so I'm not necessarily looking at it from like a parental perspective because I don't have that intimate experience with that. But certainly from a child's perspective of seeing their parent kind of accept their growth and the path they've chosen for themselves, and seeing that acceptance kind of, you know, developed into that relationship between Nadine and Layala.
thanks. So this is getting to this idea that I wanted to run by you. So I loved the story, and think I can see how the process of writing this novel could be a way of resolving or reflecting on a relationship with a parent, or with your parents in general, or also maybe the community. Um, so my idea is Garth Nix, I'm familiar with his books, and he has a realm of death in his books as well. But I feel like your book, one thing that it could potentially offer, um, and it's just a thought. So I did literary analysis, and you know, readers come up with all kinds of harebrained ideas. So if it's not helpful, that's fine. But I feel like your realm of death offers something potentially, because of the immigrant background of the author, potentially, that other books don't. The realm of death is like the other place. It's like the place that you always hear about, or the place that your parents came from. Maybe it's just a thought. I just thought, here in the United States where I'm located, there are a lot of immigrant families and a lot of kids growing up whose parents have immigrated. And I thought that the people who are reading your book might enjoy thinking about death that way, because it's a kind of separation or loss. It's a place where you have some connection to people there, sometimes really strong connection, really intimate, people who you care a lot about, but somehow they're just not in the same space, or they're just not accessible at the time. And anyway, I was thinking about it through the immigrant experience. I don't know if you want to share anything or if that is helpful or not.
It actually is. I mean, I think that's a unique perspective. I don't think I was necessarily thinking of it in those terms. Um, but I think it kind of fits in some way, in terms of like, especially Nadine, at first she's part of death. She can come and go as she pleases, but then over time, at some point, she loses the ability to return. And I think that's a lot like with my own family, my mom grew up in Trinidad and Tobago in the Syrian community there. My dad grew up in Syria. They immigrated when they were like 18 years old. They're like 60 now. So they've spent the majority of their life away from their mother country. And so for them going back I've seen it even with my mom going back to Trinidad, it's foreign to her. It's not really a place she can return to anymore to live. It's a place that she visits. And so I think you have a point there with this idea of immigration where, it's this, especially with Layala also wanting to go into death and just not having the ability to do that. I know that from my experience from traveling to Syria. I love it, especially pre-war. I think it is such a beautiful culture, beautiful country. I mean, I loved being there. So many ancient sites. The people are so wonderful. The food is delicious. The music. I mean, everything was so beautiful about it. But I can't live there. It's not it's not my home. And I'll end with this. I remember when I was younger, I probably was in my teens, and my dad asked me this question. And he said, "What country do you see as your home, America or Syria?" And my initial thought was, I'm going to lie and say Syria because I think it'll make him happy. Right. And then I said, well, I thought like, I don't know. I don't want to lie to him. I'm just going to be honest. And I said America. And he said, good, because if you said Syria, I'd know you were lying. And so even like the parent that's the immigrant realizes that their child is never quite part of that world either, as much as they'd want it to be. And so I think that's a unique perspective. And, I've certainly thought about that in the past. So maybe it kind of, slipped in without me realizing, but it wasn't really a conscious choice there.
Yeah. And the way that it's written, it's you don't have to have any connection to an immigrant experience or be looking for that in order to relate to the story. It's about separation, about loss, about grief, like you said, and it's universal to the human experience. So that's just one lens. So, different question about characters. You seem to value complexity in your characters, avoiding characters who are all good or all bad. Is there anything you'd like to say about the development of the characters? Were there any challenges along the way?
Yeah, I did make the choice, especially with Sheikh Hamadi and Gamuna. Initially, when I first started writing, I thought they would just be like the villain, very black and white villain. And then I started thinking, like, for example, Gamuna, I really didn't want her to just be a villain. I wanted her to have a sort of humanity to her. And so that's why I kind of brought in her daughter, Sayu, as this like very humanizing aspect to her character. At the end of the day, yes, she's the goddess of death. She's the ruler of this realm, but she's also a mother who is grieving. Yes, the sheikh is a villain, but he's also very tied to his granddaughter, which is also a very conscious choice that I made because, again, I didn't want him to just be a pure villain. He's very evil. He's not a good person at all, but I wanted him to have one redeeming quality. And I needed that quality to be something that kind of tied him to Nadine, and that's Layala. And so, I definitely made the choice to make sure that these characters weren't just good or bad. Like even Nadine, she's morally gray. I mean, she's willing to kill literally for her child. She will slice her throat, and she will not have any qualms doing that because her focus is making sure her child is safe and healthy. And that's not like, you know, I'm not trying to judge her character as a person or anything. It's just that is who she is. You know, same with Rami, who he's not good. And even now, I'm not sure if he's good or bad. I'll be honest. I have no idea. I have not decided if I think he's a good person or a villain. I don't know. I think he's also kind of morally gray, like Nadine, who is very focused. They're both very focused on their goal, and that's it. You know, come what may, I will focus on my goal. If I have to cut down people, so be it. If I have to give you a favor, so be it. Like, I will do what I have to. And so I did make these, you know, these very direct choices to make sure that my characters weren't just this or that, because nobody in our lives are like that. You know, people are so complex. You know, nobody's pure goodness or pure evil. Like, there's nobody in the world like that. I think everybody probably has a redeeming quality, you know, maybe apart from like someone like Hitler, I don't know, but like apart from that, we're all kind of a mix of good and bad.
One more question about characters. So not long after I read your book, I had a dream one night and there was a wolf in it. And it occurred to me sort of like the next morning, like sort of consciously, unconsciously reflecting on that, I was like, huh, there was a wolf in that book I just read. And I was thinking that book, The Jinn Daughter, has sort of a dreamlike quality to it. And it also, that's probably the fairy tale or folk tale in influence. Um, so my question for you is, do you see a difference between characters in a novel like yours versus characters in a folk tale, for example? Thinking about perspective. So the character that we really see through their eyes, at least the simplest character to identify as, yes, that's the one, is Nadine. But I'm just wondering about that. It seems like your novel draws on folk tales, but it allows for more complexity. So do you have any thoughts on that, on character?
Yes, I specifically wanted to write it in a folktale fashion. Again, you know, going back to my father and his stories, they were all folk tales. You know, um, they were all the folk stories I think he must have grown up with. Some he probably honestly made up on the spot. He's just very creative like that. And so when I wrote this, I wanted it to be kind of, you know, lyrical prose. I didn't want it to be like hard and crisp, you know, writing. It's per se. I wanted it to be more like you're saying, that dreamy quality. I had just read prior to writing The Bear and the Nightingale by Catherine Arden, who, if anyone hasn't read it yet, highly recommend it. It also has that very dreamlike quality. And so after reading that, I started seeking out other books that were written in that style because I absolutely love it. It is folkloric. There is this whimsical quality to it that I think gives it like a watery feel, which is what I really wanted. Another book that is similar is, it's coming out, hasn't come out yet, but Watermoon. If anyone hasn't heard of it, I read an arc. I just finished reading it. It is beautifully written. And again, kind of that similar style. So yes, to answer your question, definitely was writing it in a folkloric fashion, folktale fashion, and really wanted that dreamlike, whimsical quality, because I think that's exactly what a fairy tale is. It's a blend of a dream and reality, and a way to understand reality. And that's really the purpose of stories. It's to help us understand reality. That's why the human brain is wired for story. So
And yet it's more than just a folktale, right? Like it, because it seems to me that if you were telling just a story, it would all be third person, like, and then she went to, and then he did this. And because of Nadine especially, we have the perspective from, we get a sense of her thoughts and feelings. So there's something that this novel is offering that some people would say a novel can offer that the genre like of a folk story can't. So I just wondered if you want to say anything else about like in the writing process, did Nadine take over? Why Nadine? Why not somebody else? We don't get thoughts and feelings of the other characters. Do you think you might explore those in a sequel someday? I don't know anything else about that.
Yes. It's funny you say Nadine took over. She did. When I sat down to write initially, I actually was planning on writing from Layala's perspective. And so as I started writing, though, Nadine kind of just took over. She became the dominant character. And so I kind of just let it go because I thought, well, we'll see where it goes. I didn't have an outline. I honestly had no idea where the story was going to go. I just kind of sat and wrote, and whatever came out every day, that's what came out. That was the story. So I kind of let Nadine do her own thing. And so the story just evolved from her perspective. I think in a sequel, it will definitely have to be from Layala's perspective. I think Nadine's story has kind of been told. I think she's gotten her story out. She's told her like soul's story in a sense. And I think it's time for Layala, and especially with the growth between the two characters in Jinn Daughter, they do grow where Nadine accepts Layala's life and her life choices, and Layala now starts to follow her own path. So I think it's a natural progression into Layala's perspective in a potential sequel.
Yeah, definitely. Looking forward to it. At this point, I'm going to incorporate the first question from the chat and encourage any listeners who have questions at this point. If you want to share those, I will do my best, and other people who see them can, Susan can help if I miss something. So the question is mythology a way of commenting on reality?
Absolutely. I think if you look back on a lot of mythology, I was reading something recently and I'm kind of blanking on what I was reading, but it was this author who had done some research into, or this researcher, sorry, had done some research into the mythology, like myths like the Cyclops, like one eye, and I forget what else it was. I think like dragons and so forth. And so she actually dug into archaeology and fossils and started seeing this connection where some of the fossils actually were kind of similar to how some mythological creatures are described. And so from her perspective as a researcher, and I don't remember what her background is. I don't know if it's archaeology or something else, but from her perspective and her work, she started making the connection that these myths might have been the ancient people's way of understanding the fossils they might have found, while they were building their homes or and so forth. And so I honestly think just like any story, mythology is a way for us to understand reality. The human brain is very much wired for stories, for receiving stories and for telling stories. I mean, think about when you sit down with a friend, what are you doing? You're having story time. You are telling each other a story about your day, about an event, about I'm annoyed at this person, or I was so happy this happened, right? You're telling a story. That is what we're wired for. We're social creatures. And I do think that is how we communicate with each other. There's so many, pieces of evidence from like archaeology and so forth. Like, I remember in college in like some history class, they showed us like a photo of like a little, I think it was like a figurine of an elephant or like a woolly mammoth or something. And so they were encouraging us to think about why would an early human make something like this. One of the ideas was maybe it was a way to teach how to hunt an animal, right? Like here's a figurine, here's a story of like how you can pierce the underside or wherever it is. And so again, another way of storytelling. And I think anything that we tell is a story, and mythology is such a powerful way of understanding our reality,
Okay.
especially over time. Yeah.
Quick follow-up, and then there are a couple of other different questions. The person asked, is religion part of that, or is the spiritual rolled out?
I think that's for an individual to decide. I think some people will say, yes, religion is mythology. Some people say, no, this is reality, and I think people need to just decide for themselves what they want to believe. I think, if you look at the history of religion, especially like ancient religions, like, yeah, we look at, I don't know, Norse gods, like Norse mythology as mythology. We don't look at it as a religion. For people who practice that was their religion. That was probably the most reality of realities for them, right? I think religion is part of the myth collection. But I don't want to necessarily comment on that because I know religion can be very tense. And again, I really think people just need to decide for themselves. For me, religion is mythology. I think it's beautiful. I think their stories, I think they're told in such a compelling way to help us understand. It helps us understand how societies are structured, how we should behave in a society. I mean, looking at it from a Christian perspective, the 10 Commandments, it's how do you treat other people so that you are also treated well? Because that's how society survives. And so I think ultimately, from my perspective, yes, religion is mythology, is understanding reality. But again, let everybody else decide what they believe. I'd be curious what other people think. But I know it's a very personal question for someone to kind of determine on their own.
Okay, a question from Facebook from Sharif from Egypt. He says, I feel like this is a creative way to revive the dear ones and the old alike. Do you believe that there is an actual way or a Middle Earth where the two worlds can meet and take care of each other?
I wish. I really do. I would say no. I think the only Middle Earth is a very temporary one, and that is the memories we have and we share in stories about the departed. Um, like I can share a story about my grandparents. I don't think I'll ever meet them again. I don't believe in an afterlife. That's not a thing that um, resonates with me. I wish it did. Honestly, I truly did. I truly do. Um, I think the only Middle Earth there is the stories I share about them, the pictures I have of them, the memories I keep of them. Once I die, I think that ends, that tie is severed. And so, which is why I'm saying it's a very temporary Middle Earth, if you want to call it that. It really depends on who's alive. And I think it's kind of going back to earlier thoughts about, this idea of taking care of death and the dead. I think this is how we do so. It's by sharing our stories about them and keeping them alive as long as we're alive. Past that, I think that's it. That's just time. That's life. It's life becomes death, becomes life, and that's just the cycle.
There's a question about pomegranate seeds. The pomegranate seeds play a crucial role in your novel. What is the significance of these seeds in the story, and do they have any specific cultural or symbolic meaning in your culture? However you take that.
Yes. So in Arab culture, I know pomegranates are very important. I know in other myths, like even Greek myths, it's a symbol of like rebirth and immortality. Think like Persephone and Hades. So yes, I did kind of draw from that. When I was writing Jinn Daughter, a lot of people say this is like a Persephone retelling. I honestly didn't know the Persephone story at that time. I didn't know pomegranates featured. It must have kind of like trickled into my mind just through society. I don't know, growing up. So I must have known that on some level, but it wasn't like a conscious thing. But I do know pomegranates are a symbol of immortality and rebirth in a lot of cultures. And so I knew that from Arab culture, and that's what I was kind of drawing in from. Um, Especially where I don't know for sure, but I think pomegranates can grow in the desert, which is probably why they're associated with rebirth and immortality and life and death. And so I think that's why it's so important with Arabs. And I really wanted to bring them in. I love the fruit itself. I think it's such a beautiful fruit. I think, it's such a compelling fruit, if that sounds normal, because of how it's, so part of our culture, part of many cultures, and part of so many different mythologies.
So Sue has asked, because you've mentioned that our brains are wired for stories, can you please talk about your work as a brain researcher and how that has informed your work as a writer? And this is connected to an earlier question for the person who wrote that. Your question is included in this.
Yeah, I would say my research, not so much the research itself is connected to my writing, but kind of I think the process. So research is this act of creation and discovery, right? You ask a question, you determine an answer to that question through your work. You do that by developing a study, by testing, by analyzing. with writing, it's kind of the same process where it's also this act of creation and discovery. You also have a question, what if this jinn told the stories of the dead and had a daughter? What would that look like? And so that's the question. And you kind of tell the story to answer that question. So I think it's not so much the work itself that informs, but the mindset and the process going in about question, answer, and then everything kind of in between, which is the analysis, which if you're telling a story, that's the plot itself becomes the analysis, because that's how you tell the answer to the question.
Great. So there's just, more questions. So you can keep this short if you want. What is the message taken from the story, in your opinion?
I think it is ultimately acceptance. There are so many different types of grief we can carry. And I kind of mentioned this earlier. It can be the grief of a life not lived, the grief of a life lived, grief of a life lost. There's so many different kinds of grief we can carry. And I think to live this life, we need to accept the grief. I mean, I think we need to feel it, we need to experience it, but ultimately we just need to accept it. It's someone, a loved one dies, you will grieve them the rest of your life for certain. But at some point you will accept that they're gone and all you have left are memories. You can grieve a life path that you didn't take. And at some point you have to accept that you didn't take that life path. So I think if I had to sum it up in one word, it would be acceptance, and I think that's really why I wrote it. I was writing it in a period of intense grief, a lot of pain, but also I was getting to the point of accepting that pain. And so I think that kind of comes across at the end of the story, where everyone just kind of accepts that they're on a different path, and so is everybody else.
So this one's connected a little bit to the process that you just referred to. As a debut novel, what were some of the most rewarding and challenging aspects of bringing this novel to life? Did you have to rewrite some, or did the plot just flow?
I think the plot just kind of flowed, but I did go back and do a lot of edits. So of course I had to kind of clean up certain aspects. I won't give what's the word? I won't give away a plot point, but a spoiler. But somebody dies in the book who initially I really didn't want them to die. And then when I went back on a later edit, I changed it to they died. And so that kind of changed the trajectory of some of the storyline. But with a debut novel, I think it was just a very creative time for me. The process was a chance to just tell the story I wanted to tell and see where it went. And so it was actually very freeing. It was very cathartic, I think, again, because I was writing it out of pain in life, and trying to understand and make sense of everything. And so it was just like a relief for me and a release. And I think is also such a way I was also feeling a little unmoored from my culture. I moved away from home. I'd been away from home for so many years. I didn't really have anybody to speak Arabic to. So I was feeling like I was losing my language and my culture. And so, Arabic is in the book. And I did that intentionally because I wanted to feel a sense of connection to my culture that I felt like I was losing. And so I think it was just a very healing process for me in writing this book. And it kind of gave me a way to like find my sense of self again, which is such a gift. I don't think every book gives you that, but for this one, I got very lucky.
All right, we've got a couple different questions from Sharif, who's already asked questions, so you can pick and choose if you want. He asks about reincarnation, that might show up in upcoming writings, or if you have any ideas on that, and also about titles. If you find is it easy to choose titles of your books? Did you think of lots of titles?
I almost feel like finding the title is harder than writing the book. Because you have to choose a title that's compelling enough that draws people in. People are brought in by a title and by a cover before they even, turn your book over to see the description. And so we went through a couple iterations and then landed on the Jinn Daughter. initially I was calling it the Jinn Daughter's death. That was an idea. So yeah, I mean, we went through several iterations, landed on this. I think it draws people in enough that they're like, well, what does that mean? Whose daughter? Who's the Jinn? Why is there a daughter? Why should I care? And plus the cover is beautiful. So, whoever designed it did a great job. So I think that kind of draws people in. Thank you. With the idea of reincarnation, I don't know if I necessarily would bring that into a sequel. I think there might be like touches of it in the sense that, there might be some resurrection elements, but that's still kind of separate. I think the resurrection scene in Jinn Daughter is somewhat of a reincarnation scene, especially with the twist that happens with regards to that. Again, I won't give a spoiler. So I think that's a reincarnation, but it's not quite the same. It's not like they're being reincarnated necessarily as a completely different person or creature. They are themselves. They're just back to life. So I don't know if I'd explore that. I mean, I'll definitely keep that in mind. I mean, it's an interesting idea. I just don't know how I'd necessarily bring that in.
So there's a question about genre and the future you're envisioning. The question is, will you stick to one genre in your novels, or are you planning to cover other genres? And this seems like an opportunity if you want to mention future endeavors.
Yeah, I hope as a writer I can grow and not just stick to one genre. I hope I have the opportunity and the ability to try my hand at different styles of writing, different types of books. I've been working on a similar, actually, in style, in like the writing style and the themes of Jinn Daughter. It's based on like Arabian sort of folklore, so I have been working on that. That's very similar. But I'm also working on because again, my mom's Trinidadian, right? So there's this Caribbean element of stories I also grew up with that are Trinidadian, Trini folklore. And so I've been working on a novel that is more Gothic folklore and Caribbean based, that I think kind of, highlights her side of the family. And that's different. That's a completely different writing style than Jinn Daughter. It's not really dreamy and lyrical anymore. It's just like, it's crisper because it's Gothic. I'm trying to bring in these horror elements. So, no, I don't think I want to stick to just one genre. I think I will always stick to fiction for the most part because I enjoy that. I have ideas for nonfiction, including some neuroscience books that I really want to write. Who knows, right? Like I want to do it. I have an idea for historical fiction. Who knows, right? There's so many different things I could do, and I really hope I grow and continue to grow as a writer.
There's a question about the term magical realism. If you think this is an example of that or not, how you feel about that term.
Honestly, I don't really understand the genres half the time. I've heard it being considered magical realism. I think it could fit in the sense of, there's, I think magical realism, the way I understand what it is or what it refers to is, our reality that then like involves or incorporates a magical system. So it's fantasy, it's fiction maybe, but it's specifically that it is rooted in our world. And so that's kind of what, Jinn Daughter is. Nadine is living in this world, but there's also this magical component and this other realm that she interacts with. So I think it could fit, but I'm not an industry expert in this by all means. I leave that to the actual experts. So yeah.
That's related to a question that I had for you, though, so I have to take the opportunity. I was going to ask you, what is magic for you in this book? It seems like it's very connected to nature. It explores death. I was taking note as a reader, there's clay magic, that's Nadine, shadow and death magic, that's Rami, plant magic, Layala, earth magic, Kamuna. There's not a whole system mapped out, though. Is that a conscious choice? Any thoughts about
it was a way for me to show that the world in the book is so much vaster than what you're seeing. It's like if anyone's ever played computer games and there's like this map in, usually lower hand corner, left hand corner, And as you explore, more of the map opens up. But until you explore that region, it's just black. You don't see a single thing. And so for me, writing, that was my intention, is that you only see glimpses because the world is vast. You only see, you know, what you see because Nadine knows what she knows. If you recall in the book, it mentions that her family was killed off for the most part. Like her people, the jinns were essentially had genocide committed against them by the humans, led by people like her father-in-law, Sheikh Hamadi. And so she lost a lot of that culture, a lot of that heritage, and that ability to know and understand magic. And so from her perspective, she doesn't know a lot, and therefore you as the character can't know a lot either. I also left it kind of open because I would want to write future books where maybe I explore those other magical systems, I explore different characters a little bit differently. And that kind of gives me the opportunity and the space to do so, because I'm not locked into the rules that I, created in Jinn Daughter, because there aren't any rules yet. You only see a few of them.
There's another question. The relationship between Nadine and her daughter Layala is so tense. How did you approach writing this complex and emotional relationship?
Yeah, a lot of it came from, again, that kind of reflection I was having being older and reflecting on my relationship with my parents, especially my mother. And so I really kind of drew from that in understanding from her perspective than I had previously, because when I was a teenager in my 20s, I was looking at it from my perspective, as her child, but as I got older, I started seeing her views a little bit more and a little bit differently, and I started understanding her a bit more. But I really wanted to kind of bring in this tension between mother and daughter, because that's what I had growing up. And I think a lot of people do. A lot of people have this tension with their parents as a teenager. They love and respect their parents, yes, but they're also becoming their own person. And I really wanted that for Layala. She's 14, she's rebellious, she's headstrong, but she loves her mother, and she realizes her mother is the only person she has. And I really wanted that to kind of come across. And so a lot of that tension really just came from me reflecting on my own life.
A few more questions from Sharif, so feel free to pick and choose if you like. Do you have favorite writers of all time? Do you prefer contemporary writers or classics? And then do you have any rituals before or during writing?
All right. I'd say my ritual is probably making a pot of Turkish tea. I love a good tea. It's right here. I don't drink coffee, I drink tea. I think my blood has been replaced by tea at this point. So that is my ritual. Lately, I've also been going to a Turkish cafe near me, and I just sit there for like 4 or 5 hours writing. They bring out tea, they bring out carrot juice. So that's kind of been my ritual of just like finding my corner, getting my tea, and then just writing. In terms of what I read or favorite authors, I don't know. I think I just read whatever. I'm very much a mood reader, so I read what I'm in the mood to read. That could be fiction, it could be nonfiction, it could be classics, it could be contemporary. I mean, I'm reading 3 different books right now. I'm reading one audiobook, I'm doing an e-reader, and I'm doing a physical copy. They're all different. One's a nonfiction nature, like environmental book. Another one is this like contemporary one. And another one is your book that you translated. So I'm reading totally different things. And again, just mood reader. So I try to read different as much variety as I can, because I think that's, to be a good writer, you need to read a lot. And that means reading variety.
Yeah, I remember when I was in Cairo at the American University in Cairo, we were able to meet with a very famous translator from Arabic to English. And somebody asked the question, like, how do you become a great translator or something like that? And his recommendation was read a lot, like in your own language, like whatever it is that speaks to you, just read a lot, and it will come through in ways that you may or may not predict. New question. Any plans to visit Cairo anytime soon? Any plans for book discussions or public events in person? So if you have a book tour or any upcoming events you'd like to mention.
Yeah, I would love to visit Cairo. It's been on my dream list for years. I've had an idea to write a book that's set in like the universities of the Middle East, so kind of like a dark academia, but in the Arab world. I know Cairo has a lot of beautiful universities to visit. I've seen pictures, I've seen videos across the Middle East, not just Cairo, but I would love to visit. I do have a couple events coming up in like my tour, but they're more like local to me. So like the DC, New York area. I have, what do I have? Oh yes, Bus Boys and Poets in DC on July 28th. That's an in-person event. I don't think they're doing a virtual. And then I have an event in New York. I'll be in your place, Melanie. I'll actually be asking the questions of a debut author. The book is called Memento Mori by Eunice Hong, I think. It's beautifully written. I definitely recommend it. She is a lawyer by trade, but she writes and she brings the neuroscience actually into this like Persephone retelling. So very, very kind of similar in some ways to Jinn Daughter. Her book is also a story about, the loss of loved ones, about dementia in loved ones. Beautifully written. So I'll be in New York for that, and you'll find it on my Instagram. I definitely have been sharing that out. And I think in October, there's Fall for the Book Festival. It's in Fairfax, Virginia at George Mason University, but that's also in person. I will also be with Eunice, author of Memento Mori. We're collaborating there. We'll be on a panel together on discussing folklore and the impact and power of folklore. But I think that's the majority of what I have going on. But if anyone has ideas for festivals, I mean, let me know. I will definitely try.
And on that note, here's the last question for you. How can readers follow you? So where would they tell you that? Is there a certain social media feed or website you'd like to mention?
Yes, I'm only on Instagram. I have accounts elsewhere that I never check, but I am on Instagram as Rania the Writer.
Wonderful. Thank you. Well, I am going to turn this back over to Susan because we've come to the end of our time together for today, but thank you so much for answering our questions and for leaving us with a wonderful story. And I hope we get to read lots more from you in the future.
Thank you. I've loved the questions. I definitely appreciate everyone's time and energy.
I personally loved it too. I enjoyed it so much, and I could see also from Facebook that our followers are enjoying it. I can see hearts flowing all over the live.
Good to know.
That's always a good sign. Well, basically that wraps up our discussion of the Jinn Daughter. 1 hour is not enough. There's so many things that we want to talk about, but if you haven't had the chance to read it yet, make sure to get your copy online. You can order for major book retailers. You'll find it easily. Also on our website, AUC Press, you'll find different purchasing links. And the recording of this talk will be available shortly on our Facebook page, AUC Press, and Hoopo Fiction page, and also on our YouTube channel, AUC Press. And those who've registered through Zoom, they're going to get the link directly to their emails tomorrow morning. And yeah, that was a fascinating discussion. And I hope we didn't give away too much details from the plot twists and the plot line. But I hope this encourages people to read the novel. Thank you so much, Rania and Melanie, for your time. Oops, somebody just told me I have it upside down. My bad. For your time and the discussion. And thank you everyone who joined us. I'm sure you enjoyed it as much as I did. Rania, Melanie, any last words before we end the talk?
No, just thank you everyone for showing up. I, definitely appreciate it. Definitely loved the questions. They're getting me thinking about a lot of things like reincarnation and everything. So definitely appreciate all the answers.
We're waiting for the sequel, let's say, or
yeah, we'll see.
Okay, thank you everyone. Wish you a wonderful rest of the day, and we'll see you soon on our virtual discussions. Thank you. Take care.
Bye.